Hi guys, and welcome back to I Speak English. My name's Hayley, and in this lesson today we're going to be taking a look at some useful phrases specifically for the Cambridge B2 speaking exam and specifically for part 2 of your speaking exam, where you need to compare and contrast some photos. If you're not B2 level, this might still be useful for you even if you're C1, because we're going to be taking a look at some phrasal verbs, but also some useful phrases that you could maybe use in your C1 exam as well. So do stick around if you are C1 level or B2 level and you're taking a Cambridge exam. Before we do get started though, please do make sure that you're subscribed to the channel so that you can get weekly videos from me. And if you find this video useful, give it a little like as well. It just helps it to reach more people so that they can prepare for the Cambridge exam as well. Alright, so let's get started. Let's take a look at some of these useful phrases then. Alright, so some useful phrases for your Cambridge B2 speaking exam, specifically part 2. First of all, let's take a look at part 2. What does part 2 actually look like? So if you're not familiar with it, it'll look like this in your exam. So this is your long turn, which means you get 1 minute to talk about 2 photographs, and then your partner will also have to do the same thing, the other person in the exam, the other candidate. And you also have to answer a question as well in terms of those photographs. Okay, so that's what your B2 Part 2 speaking exam looks like. Now, how are you gonna kind of start this off? What are you supposed to say first? You might be kind of asking yourself that question. I'm not sure how to actually start it. So a useful phrase for you to actually introduce kind of the task and just start speaking, getting the ball rolling speaking. You can use any of these 2 phrases here. So it's either to start with or at first glance. If you use at first glance, you'll get very high marks because I'd actually say this is probably like more of a C1 phrase than B2 phrase. For example, you could say, at first glance, they appear to have a few things in common. Something like that. Or to start with, they appear to have a few things in common. So you can just introduce the topic or the photographs in that way. So that's a nice way just to kind of get yourself talking. Okay. If you want to give your opinion, so one thing the examiners are looking for is that you're not constantly repeating the same vocabulary. And this is quite easy to do, especially when you want to say, I think. Often exam candidates will always say, oh, I think this, I think that, I think this. And then you'll get a bit of a lower mark because your vocabulary is not as varied. So your language mark in your exam, you need to have a kind of big range of vocabulary and also accurate vocabulary. So these 2 phrases here just give you other options instead of saying I think. So you could say I would say that, or I suppose. Either of those are nice options so that you're not repeating the word I think over and over again. For example, I would say that being a doctor is more challenging because XYZ. Or I suppose that being a doctor is more challenging because XYZ. So use those in place of think just to give yourself a bit more kind of variety when you talk. Okay. All right, next up, contrasting. So the main part of this task is to compare and contrast the photos in terms of the question. Okay, so to contrast, you could use the phrase in contrast, or you could use whereas, or you could use both. So again, you're not repeating yourself. Okay, so you could say, for example, whereas the first picture focuses on X, the second highlights Y. Okay, and then you've got a nice contrast. And again, you're not repeating yourself. So any of those 2 for contrasting. By the way, if you are kind of struggling to practice with part 2, if you're struggling to kind of find questions, or if you are practicing but you don't actually know whether you're making mistakes or something like that, There is a great app that you can download. It's called 5 Minute English, and you can get thousands of speaking part 2 questions as well as part 1, part 3, and part 4. And basically what you do is you record yourself answering the question that you get. It looks like this. This is an example of C1, but it also has B2 as well, C2, B1, lots of different levels. And you record yourself answering one of the questions, and then you'll get automatic vocabulary and grammar corrections. So it's really great for seeing those repetitive mistakes that you're making. Also gives you vocabulary suggestions as well, like phrasal verbs, useful phrases like I'm giving you here. So it just helps you to improve that bit better without having to take, really expensive lessons. I'll put the link up here if you want to download it. I'll also put it in the description as well. It's only available to download on Google Play at the moment, but there is a free trial, so you can practice up to 5 minutes of audio for free. And then if you find it useful, you can subscribe to it if you like. So I'll put that link in the description if you want to download it. Just a little tip for you. In the meantime, we're going to head on and we're going to take a look at some more useful phrases, this time for comparing. So we just looked at contrasting. Comparing is when you want to make like a similarity. Okay, if there's a similarity and you want to talk about it, you can use likewise, or you could say in the same way. You could also say similarly, but it's quite difficult to say. It's a bit of a mouthful, similarly. So instead I would just use likewise. It's a bit more simple for you to use. For example, say the doctor might find X difficult. Likewise, the police officer might also struggle with X. Okay, so you start the second sentence. When you're making a comparison, you kind of make your point, and then in the second sentence, you start it with likewise, and then you compare. So comparing and contrasting you absolutely have to do in this task. That's what the examiners are expecting to see. All right, moving on, we're going to take a look at some phrasal verbs. So phrasal verbs are really useful in your B2 exam. You also get tested on them in use of English, and you're expected to use them in writing as well, and definitely in speaking. So any phrasal verbs you can use are always useful and will get you higher points if you use them correctly. So our first phrasal verb is to stand out. This means if something stands out, it catches your attention or it looks very obvious. So because you're describing and comparing photographs, you could say something like, something that stands out to me in the first photo is X. So something that catches my attention. So stand out is a really useful phrasal verb for your speaking part 2. So try to use that if you can. Our next phrasal verb is move on. This you could also use in part 3 as well, but we can use it in part 2. It means when you change topic or you move to the next thing that you want to talk about. In this case, it would be the photo. So once you're kind of done talking about photo 1 and you've made some comparisons, some contrasts, then you would say, okay, moving on to the second photo, and then you start comparing about that. So this is a phrasal verb, but it's also like a linking word at the same time because you're using it to kind of help the flow of your speech. Okay, so it kind of counts for 2 marks here, vocabulary and organization, because you're using it to connect 2 sentences together. So another really useful one. Our next one is cope with. Okay, so the reason I've included this one is because often in part 2 speaking, the question is usually about difficulties or disadvantages or something like that. And to cope with means when you have to deal with usually a difficult situation. So this is why I've included this one. For example, you could say the police officer might find it hard to cope with violent people. Okay, so might find it hard to deal with them. You could use deal with as well as a kind of synonym, or you could use cope with. So this is a really good one to use if you're asked about difficulties or disadvantages or something like that. Okay. All right, and another one, so to point out. If you point out something, you draw someone's attention to that thing. So you kind of focus on something or make somebody else focus on that thing. So in speaking part 2, you could say, first, I'd like to point out that the doctor has the easier job because X, Y, Z. Okay, so I'd like to draw your attention to this thing. Or I'd like to explain or show this thing. Again, you could also use this in part 3 as well. When you're having a discussion with someone, you could also say, oh, well, I'd like to point out that, and then give your opinion. Okay, so useful for part 2 and part 3, this one. All right, so that's it. They're all your kind of useful phrases. I hope you did find that useful. If you did, please do give this video a like and make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. It just helps more people to find these videos and get some help for their Cambridge exam as well. If there's anything about the Cambridge B2 exam that you're not sure about, any grammar, vocabulary, any video that you'd like me to make, leave me a comment, let me know in the comments, and I'll try and get a video made for you. And that's all for me from today. So I'll see you in another video soon. Right, bye.